Hello, friends, and welcome back to Stories About Entitled People. We start today's video with a Karen meltdown in a convenience store. She demanded service, screamed, "Help me," or else, and when she tried to slap who she thought was an employee, she ended up arrested. But before we begin, best way to support our channel is to leave comments, like, and subscribe with the turned-on bell so you don't miss the new video every single day. Here we go. Burned bright, extinguished quickly. I've just got the local corner shop / convenience store where I witnessed, mostly heard admittedly, a rather spectacular Karen takedown. The two people involved are the entitled Karen and let's say strong-armed woman. Moments after entering the shop, I hear from the next aisle over a huffing noise, followed by the traditional call of a wild Karen. "I need you to help me," matched with the ever-elicited response, "Sorry, I don't work here," but extended to include, "I'm a police officer." Karen's almost predictably moronic reply of, "You effing liar, you work here. Help me or else," gave me reason to go and witness what came next, and I got there to see the sternest look from a police officer in full uniform. I think that's a beat officer for Americans. But the idiotic Karen hadn't released the implication and, full on, I kid you not, reached out to slap the officer in the face. That ended badly. A second later, Karen's arm is up behind her back and the cuffs are going on, arrested for assaulting a police officer. Epic. At least this Karen picked on the right person, someone able to defend themselves and take action against Karen that'll hopefully teach her an important lesson. And our second story. My narcissist boss said she never misses deadlines. Until she did. About 20 years ago, I used to work as an office assistant at a small company where we would receive orders from clients and then we would assign the work to one of our freelancers who were well compensated and respected professionals. My boss was such a professional herself, and when possible, we would assign that work to her. I accepted the minimum wage job because she told me I could sometimes get tasks assigned as a freelancer with a nice freelancer compensation, that she would personally train me, and that in less than a year, I would most likely be promoted to a regular freelancer and make very good money. This sounded like a great career path to my young and naive ears. One of the things she told me in the very beginning was that when you take over an order, you become like a project manager for that order. You need to make sure that the freelancer would finish the work on time, as the work was usually time sensitive. Additionally, she loved going on long lectures about how she's paying me, minimum wage, for me to use my brain and figure things out when necessary. These lectures were mainly a vehicle for her to stroke her own ego by explaining to her employees how our brains were not as smart as hers. One day, our biggest corporate client had placed a large order that was due on a Monday by noon, and we'd assigned the task to my boss to do over the weekend. It was Monday morning, time was ticking, and my boss hadn't arrived at the office. The client had called to see if we were going to provide the work soon, as it was urgent. I tried calling my boss, who didn't pick up her mobile. I called half an hour later and texted her, no answer or reply, while noon was fast approaching. So I called her landline at home. Her husband picked up, told me she wasn't home, and I explained very briefly why I was trying to get a hold of her. Less than an hour before noon, my boss called, furious that I'd been so insistent on getting a hold of her and that I had created a state of stress and emergency at her house. Her home number was for emergencies only, and this wasn't an emergency. It's not professional to call people when they're not at work. She told me how she got everything under control and she was now sending the work to the client directly. When she arrived at the office, she gave me a big scolding in person and told me that I do need to hound other freelancers, but not her. It was her business and she got everything handled. She knew all the clients and they were clients because of her. She looked me in the eye and told me, if I take over a task, it's not your task anymore, it's my task. You don't need to bother me with reminders. You just give me the instructions from the client and I'll handle everything myself. From that point on, your job is done. I never ever miss deadlines. If the client calls, you tell them I'm on it and you don't call me or text me about it. Fair enough. I apologized for the stress and repeated the new instructions back to her for confirmation. She was very happy with that and confirmed I had understood everything. She once more gave me her favorite lecture about how she's paying me, minimum wage, for me to use my brain, with a lot of condescending examples of how she always uses her brain, unlike us normal workers. I could only nod along as if her narcissistic rant was actually teaching anybody anything. About a month or so later, another client came in with an order. I accepted it. My boss was available to handle it, so I forwarded everything to her, and I considered my work in regard to that order done as instructed. On the day of the deadline, I was on vacation and was hiking in a remote area with spotty cell coverage. The other office assistant called me and told me the client had called the office to check if the work was ready. I told my colleague that our boss was on it and that we didn't need to worry as our boss was going to handle it, and that my clear instructions were to tell the client our boss was personally on it. The task would be done by the deadline, and explicitly not to call our boss to remind her of the deadline. Then, since I was on vacation, I needed to conserve my battery and everything at the office was handled, I switched off my phone. An approaching deadline that my boss had to meet was explicitly not an emergency. Also, I'd recently realized that my boss had knowingly misled me about the career opportunities this job was affording me, so I wasn't going to be on call on my rare day off. While I was hiking without a care in the world, my boss had managed to forget about the deadline. By the time she realized she'd missed it, the office was closed. My boss had urgently finished the work, but it turned out she didn't know the client so well as she didn't have their contact details. As the order was in the office and my phone was off, she had to go there herself, fetch it, and use the contact details to deliver the work late. This was particularly embarrassing as my colleague had informed the client our boss was personally doing the work for them. When I came back to work, it was pandemonium. She screamed at me, but I simply pointed out that everything I'd done was following her instructions. Why did you do this? You told me to. Why didn't you do that? You told me not to. She was fuming, but she knew I was correct and had acted exactly as instructed. She also screamed at me for my phone being off, but I said I needed to conserve my battery for emergencies, and this was clearly not an emergency, and I'm not on call while on vacation anyway. Well, narcissists never accept blame, and she had an idea of how to shift the blame to me after all. But you didn't provide me with the client's contact details with the order assignment. How could I have delivered them the work? It was your fault for not providing me with all the information. I pointed out that she told me she knew all the clients personally, but if she had used her brain like she's constantly telling us to, she could have easily noticed that the order instructions were on the client's letterhead with all their contact details spelled out. On every single page, bottom and top. Now that was a huge slap to her fragile ego, and remembering her face in that moment still makes me smile. Needless to say, I was fired. Of course, I didn't mind. Don't you just love happy endings? It's not professional to call someone when they're not at work, says the woman who wants to call you when you're not at work. And our last story. He stole our family home. Back in 2007, my grandmother on my father's side passed away, bless her soul. She left behind a small bungalow near the sea. It wasn't much at first, the house wasn't even paid off, and the place was bare bones. Since my dad was her only son, his older sisters all agreed that the house should go to him, but with one condition. He had to finish paying off the balance. So we moved in. For years, my father worked his butt off to not just pay the house off, but to actually make it livable. He added 2 extra bedrooms, put in ceilings, tiled the floors, built another bathroom, installed a kitchen sink, and even had to dig and build a septic tank because the location had no drainage system. Basically, he turned an unfinished box into a proper home. By 2015, the house was fully paid. But when my dad went to collect the title, excuses, paperwork delays, one runaround after another. He didn't push too hard because it was family, and he thought eventually it would be handed over. Big mistake. In 2016, my dad's nephew, a retired military commander, came knocking. He brought his wife and some fancy plans with him. Nephew, Uncle, I want to build a second floor on this house. My wife and I could live here too. It makes sense for family to share. Dad, no, this is my home. I paid it off. I built it up. My dad called his older sisters to back him up, but of course they didn't want to get involved. Classic. That's when the nephew dropped the bombshell. Somehow he already had the title to the house in his name. To this day, I don't know how he pulled that off. Probably leaning on his political or military connections. My dad was livid. He called me that night. I already owned a small patch of land I'd bought for my parents' retirement, though I was still saving to build them a proper home. I told him not to give in, and he fought. But after messy court battles, I won't detail here, the nephew won. A few weeks later, my dad got a letter from the nephew's lawyer. We had 6 months to vacate, but our lawyer noticed something interesting in the contract. There was no clause preventing us from removing personal improvements we had made to the house. Cue the demolition crew. In those 6 months, we carefully stripped the house of every upgrade my dad had poured into it. The extra bedrooms, demolished. The second bathroom, gone. The tiled floors, pulled up. The ceiling, removed. The kitchen sink, ripped out. The septic tank, smashed. We returned that house to the same bare skeleton shape my father inherited back in 2007. But we didn't stop there. Before turning in the keys, we hired a painter to coat the outside of the house bright, screaming red with massive purple dots all over it. The interior, painted entirely black. It was an absolute eyesore. The kind of house that makes people cross the street to avoid looking at it. When my nephew finally walked into his victory prize, he got exactly what he won in court. The empty, unfinished shell my grandmother left behind. My father's phone blew up with calls and texts from his sisters, cousins, and everyone else in the family. "And how could you do this? This was unnecessary." "Dad, you let him steal it. I just gave it back." We ignored the rest and cut contact. My parents now live peacefully in the farmhouse I built for them on my land. They spend their mornings tending their garden, walking by the lake, and enjoying quiet evenings without the stress of family politics. As for the nephew, last I heard, he still hasn't been able to finish that monstrosity. Guess even with a stolen title, he can't build a second floor on a house that doesn't have a ceiling, floors, or plumbing. He wanted the house? He got it. Just not the house my father built. The nephew thought he'd outsmarted everyone. Instead, he walked into the very same unfinished husk your grandmother left behind, only uglier. All that courtroom fighting for a gutted shell. And your dad's line back to the family, "You let him steal it, I just gave it back," is perfect. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.